Have you ever just looked back at your life and wondered how you got to this point? Life is crazy. It's an adventure. I'm Nick. I'm Catholic. I'm in my 20s. I'm in the military, and I'm currently stationed out here at Kirtland Air Force Base. And if you asked me 10 years ago where I'd be in 10 years, I wouldn't be in Albuquerque. I definitely wouldn't be in the military. I'd probably still be Catholic, though, just probably not in practicing one. When I was getting ready for this talk, I went to adoration, and I thought of a Bible verse that kind of fits how God has worked in my life, and I'd like to share it with you all. So, a reading from the first book of Kings. Behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains, and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. In my life, I've most found God working through the still small voice. But the problem with God being the still small voice is I had to listen for him. When I was growing up, I didn't really look for God. I did all the things. I went to church on Sundays and to confession. I went through religious education. I got confirmed. I never really minded going to Mass. And sometimes I actually enjoyed the silence, but in the end, it just wasn't something I really cared about. I had more important things that swept me up, like school and sports and girls. I thought if I could be the best at these things, then I'd have enough. And if I could be the best at these things, then I'd be enough. If you're wondering why I'm in the military, it's because when I applied to the Air Force Academy out of a parental recommendation to keep my options open, I got a letter. Now, the normal process for getting into a service academy is you apply, you get a nomination from your senator or congressman, and then you get an appointment letter from the academy. Well, I hadn't gotten an appointment letter from the academy. Not yet. The letter I got was called a letter of assurance. It said that if I got a nomination, I was guaranteed acceptance to the Air Force Academy. At that moment, I felt like I was enough. So for a kid who didn't even want to join the military, I cried. Happy tears. And I knew then that I would be doing my undergrad at the U.S. Air Force Academy. When I got to the academy, being enough went right out the window, because the first thing every new cadet does is go straight into basic training. Basic training is about 6 weeks of waking up to sirens and banging on your doors, getting yelled at and physically trained, learning military knowledge and how to march, and most of all, always being wrong. Unsurprisingly, it was also the first time I really listened for God, because it was one of the first times I really needed God. During basic, we were allowed to go to church on Fridays and Sundays, and you can bet that I and a ton of other people were at church on Fridays and Sundays. By the end of basic, I made a promise to God that I would continue to go to church after basic training was over, and that this wasn't just a 6-week church stint because my life was hard. Unfortunately, after basic ended, I stopped going to Mass. For weeks, I made the excuse that I was too busy with school, military tests, training sessions, and all the other challenges freshmen year presented to me. Once again, there were too many things that I needed to be the best at, and too many distractions in my life. After another few weeks, a freshman retreat was announced to the Catholic community, and since I didn't go to church, I learned about it through one of my friends who insisted that I go. So I was like, all right, when's this retreat? She was like, oh, it's this weekend in September. And I was like, did you say weekend? Like a whole weekend? It's like, yeah, there's no way I was going on this retreat and skipping a whole weekend of getting work done. Or so I thought, because for some reason, I just felt like I should go on the retreat. And as much as I pushed that feeling down, it kept coming back. It was a small voice, but it was persistent. So I went on the retreat. Honestly, I don't remember much about it, but when I got back, I started going to church every week. Fast forward to the spring, it's a few weeks before recognition, basically a weekend where freshmen get the crack kicked out of them and we don't get any work done. And this thing called the tech retreat is announced at church. Surprise, it's the weekend before recognition. So if you thought one weekend without getting any work done was bad, try 2 weekends back to back without getting any work done. So I was not going on the tech I went on the tent retreat. Again, it just seemed like what I should do. And coming back from the retreat, I began attending a Catholic group that met Mondays after school, kind of like a weekly theology on tap, but without the alcohol, but with free pizza, so free food. Then, nearing the end of my freshman year, I was asked to staff the fall retreat. Little did they know that there was no way I could staff a retreat. I could barely even attend a retreat. So, in the spirit of me not wanting to staff the fall retreat, I staffed the fall retreat. But this time, it was different. Over the past year, I had started to grow closer to God without really knowing it. And on this retreat, I wondered if some of the ways I was living my life were worse than I thought. So I went into confession, and in confession, I asked the priest 2 questions. First, is drinking a sin? To which he replied, it can lead to sin. So I was like, great. And then my second question was, is watching porn a mortal sin? To which he replied, it is. At that moment, I had a decision to make, because at that moment, God was asking me to be all in, to face my sins and to bear my cross. And I said yes. I decided that instead of trying to be good enough for the things of this world, I wanted to be enough for God. When I got back from the retreat, I started praying the rosary every Sunday through Thursday night with a group of Catholics. And I also started going to confession once or twice a week to put an end to my addiction. The problem is, I wanted to do it alone, without anyone else knowing. So for the next year and a half, I fought my addiction in secret, and I failed in secret. I met one of my best friends in that rosary group. He was one of the first people I could really trust with my addiction, and when I did, I discovered that he was also struggling with the same temptations. So he became my ally, and in fighting with him, I learned that I didn't have to bear my cross alone. I learned that I wasn't alone, that no one was alone. And after that, fighting my addiction wasn't so hard anymore. As my academy days came to an end and COVID came on the rise, I found myself getting lonelier and longing for the community I hope to find in the next stage of my life as a graduate student at Purdue University. Initially at Purdue, I made a few Catholic friends, but the people I hung out with the most were my military friends who came from the academy with me. I had joined an Ignite group, basically a Bible study, but I wasn't invested. And I met some of the people from the Catholic young adult community, but they were kind of weird and not really my crowd. So my first year at Purdue turned into a lot of parties, a lot of drinking, and a lot of fun with people who would become my core group of friends. As the year went on, I found my values slipping and merging into different ones. My addiction was coming back, and I was letting myself do things that would really hurt some of the people I loved most. After one night of hurting someone in a way I never hoped I would hurt anyone, I hit rock bottom, and I realized I couldn't live my life the way I was living it anymore. I went to confession, I went home to rethink my life, and I came back to Purdue ready to change. I found my 2 closest Catholic friends, and I told them everything. The one brought me to his all-guys Ignite group, where I met some men living for God the way I wanted to be living. The other never stopped believing in me, and would become another one of the best friends that I've ever had. These 2 friends guided me back toward God, and when the next school year started, I joined the Catholic young adult community. In that community, I met a good friend who challenged me to start going to daily adoration, if only for 5 minutes a day, just so I could let God see me. For that first week of daily adoration, God told me that he was proud of me every day. Here's the thing about being enough for God. You don't have to be perfect to be enough for God. You don't have to be the best or have your life put together. Being enough is about striving for God. It's about getting back up over and over and over each time we fall. It's about never giving up. I've fallen so many times and I'm so far from perfect. But I know now that I am enough. And I've learned through those months of daily adoration that I may have done bad things, but I am good. And I'm still God's. Eventually, I went on to date this good friend of mine, and while we were dating, I finished up my master's at Purdue University and was told by the Space Force that my next stop was Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yay. When I left Purdue, sick, or Purdue sick. I missed my friends, I missed my girlfriend. So to combat this, I decided I wouldn't waste any time making Catholic friends in Albuquerque. The day I arrived, I went to daily mass, and I introduced myself to like the only young adult there, and I got invited to Sunday volleyball. Perfect. After that, all it took was crashing a Catholic house party and taking on an alcohol-centric Bible study group to feel ready. Well, mostly, yeah. As time moved forward, I started to get more and more unhappy. I wasn't a fan of my job, I wasn't a fan of long distance, and I wasn't really that close to anyone out here yet. So, to distract myself from my day-to-day life, I started to focus on the future. Mainly, I focused on the time when I wouldn't have to be long distance anymore. And after a couple more months, this girl and I got engaged. And I just became even more focused on the future. I could not wait to be married, and I could not wait for this current stage of my life to be over. Unfortunately, I became so distracted with the future that I let my present fall apart. And it wasn't until our relationship ended in January that I realized how focused I was on the future and how much I was neglecting the present. When that relationship ended, I hit a wall. In my mind, I had nothing to look forward to, and I still wasn't happy in the present. I didn't want to be here anymore. But I knew that wasn't my choice to make. So I started taking each day, one day at a time. I talked with friends and family. I prayed constantly. When I couldn't sleep, I'd watch Star Wars Clone Wars throughout the night. And when I finished that, I'd watch Star Wars Rebels throughout the night. But as time went on, I started to develop close relationships with the friends I leaned so much on. And I became even closer to my siblings than ever before, to the point where we'd hang out online at least once a week. And after doing almost no work for a month, I dove back into my work, and I even began to enjoy that too. That brings us to today. I'm still here. I'm still taking life one day at a time, with God by my side. Looking back over my life, I can see all the strong winds that swept me away, all the earthquakes that pulled me down, and all the fires I tried to put out. But I also know that in the midst of these times, God was with me, guiding me, nudging me back toward himself. Tonight, we have the opportunity to let God be the still small voice in our lives. Tonight, here in adoration, I challenge you to let the loudness of the world pass you by and to enter into the silence. I challenge you to let God come into your heart, and I challenge you to let God give you the strength to carry your cross, taking each day, one day at a time,